Frank, the Hall of Fame. You and I have had the conversation over the years many times about Frank Hall of Fame. And I think one of the things with Frank, because Frank is, 16 years in the league, played for multiple teams, never a first-team All-Pro, never once. So Frank is going to get measured against, Adrian Peterson, a guy like that, who was obviously the best running back in the league for several years, like carried a team to the playoffs. Frank's value, part of his value would really be increased if he'd been on the same team the whole time. Because imagine always having one running back you don't have to replace for 16 years. I mean, he was on the Niners for a long time. His time on the Niners was probably 3 times the average length of a running back's career alone. There is a value in me never having to replace you, even if you're not the best of the best. Being reliable at that position where I have to get a new guy. Hell, Kyle's got new running backs every year, let alone every 3 years, right? 2.5 years.
He was on the Niners basically his entire prime, right? 05 to 14.
I mean, that's to have a running back on your team for 9 years, or was it 10 seasons, whatever it was?
I think 10 seasons, yeah.
Is pretty valuable, right? There is a value there that augments the fact that you're not like a first-team All-Pro type running back.
Underrated, I guess we'll talk about it later.
We can do it. We're talking about it right now.
Yeah.
Just talking about it.
Incredible little NFC East jump around because he went the Niners and then the Colts. He actually was – I remember watching him with the Colts, like, he's probably not 2010 version, but he's still pretty solid. He then went Dolphins, Bills, Jets, back to back to back. I wonder if the Hoodie was like, should we just give him a call? Or was that his goal, to try to play for every team in the NFC East?
Play for Bill?
Refused to call him.
Doesn't really catch the ball a lot, which probably would have been a problem for Bill.
But I actually always thought if Kaepernick was a little more accurate on the little wheel routes, it always felt like he had good hands. They just, he's a little ahead of his time. I mean, now granted, the Niners offense was putrid, so they were throwing it to the running back a shitload. 61 catches his second year. Career high.
His second year, 61 catches. Wow. I mean, did he get close to that ever again?
53, 43, 52, 46.
Wow.
Pre-Harbaugh, he was getting the rock a ton in the passing game.
And then Harbaugh, he goes Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl.
Harbaugh, then they just started hammering him. I tweeted this the other night because I was just thinking about him after I saw like Alex and a bunch of guys that he played with just had some pretty, like, you could tell it was almost like a post about like a family member. Like it meant a lot to Alex and Joe Staley.
Yeah.
That player. Both of them had really good Instagram posts.
I saw Joe's. I did not see Alex's.
I'll
have to look for that.
I don't know if Harbaugh truly loved any player more. He might have liked certain guys equally, like a Joe Staley, a Bowman, but Frank Gore was at the top of that list. One of his love of the player, and two of just his love of like how he wanted to play and what that guy meant to his football team. Right?
Yeah. I mean, he represented, Alex came to represent it. Alex was the number 1 overall pick. Frank was a 3rd rounder, right? Frank had overcome a lot.
Wasn't he missing both his ACLs?
Frank, I would say Frank represented the blue-collar mechanic shirt probably as well as anybody.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, offensive linemen just naturally represent that. And everyone else kind of took on the persona. But Frank, I think you're right. So
he felt like, he was, but like when you watched him, you went, this is a tough guy, right? Because the one thing
smart guy and a good player.
Yeah, but just in terms of like when you think Harbaugh, you think toughness, and like he represented just like slamming between the tackles, like I'll get it done, just hammer me, with the 5 guys up front who were really good. Is that Adrian Peterson was the best running back, like legitimate. He's one of the all-time great true running backs. Hated to pass block, like wouldn't do it, which is kind of weird because when you think about Adrian Peterson, you think of a fucking mammoth human being, right? It's like he's big as most linebackers. He wouldn't do it. Saquon, who now is kind of a shell of himself, but those first year and a half, freak talent. Hated pass block. Will not pass block. When I think Frank Gore, it's like, I dare you to blitz because this guy is going to hit you in the chops. So he caught the ball. He ran inside. I wouldn't call him like a great outside runner because he wasn't like ultra fast, but he definitely could run outside. And there was like literally nothing he couldn't do. His only knock is his high-end speed, which is the one thing as a running back you don't necessarily need.
Right.
To me, his most famous run with the Niners feels like the time they finally beat Seattle and he hit the ground.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, sweet.
Because would he have hit the ground if he could have run away from the defense?
No, he would have scored, but he realized this is how smart of a player he was. He realized he wasn't going to score at like the 50.
Yeah.
And he was just going to go as far as he could to the sideline. He got to like the 15.
So
rewatching that run, he
yeah,
makes a good little cut. He sees Earl Thomas, and he doesn't try to run. He just cuts in, and he like goes around him, and Earl has to stop and then chase him. I mean, him and Richard were bearing down on him, but that was an enormous win for Jim Harbaugh and the 49ers to beat that Seattle team, who I think they ended up losing to in the championship game. But
on the stream, he was Jim Harbaugh's favorite player, yet he didn't give him the ball from the 7-yard line. Yeah, that was cuts deep.
He'd like a do-over.
I think Frank's a major exception to the rule, and you and I talk about it all the time. I'm on the same page with you. The Hall of Fame should be for the greatest of the greats. And when you're a 5-time Pro Bowler in 16 years and never a first-team All-Pro, that doesn't scream greatest of the greats. But I think at his position specifically, longevity is you take for granted. Most guys, longevity is not really part of the equation. And to be third all time in the NFL in rushing yards. Now, some guys did it in less time, right? Barry Sanders did it in 9-10 years. It took Frank 15, 16 years. Walter Payton did it in 12, 13 years. Emmett did it in 13, 14 years, but really did it before years 13 and 14, right? Emmett didn't take till his last year to become the NFL's all-time leading rusher. So I think the only two guys I read today in the top 15, not in the Hall of Fame, are Frank and Adrian Peterson. I make an exception to my kind of personal philosophy of like when you saw it, you knew that was one of the greatest players in the league at that moment in time. Because to be third all time in rushing yards in a league that chews up and spits out that position, I think is pretty incredible.
I factor in, and listen, I've had trouble, and maybe I'm being now hypocritical because of guys like Andre Reed and Tim Brown and just some guys that I thought like the Hall of Really Good. And there's nothing wrong with being in the Hall of Really Good. But definitely Andre Reed, right, played in a lot of big games on those Buffalo teams. Because I do factor that in. Like, if you're an elite player in big games, like, that has to matter to me in the Hall of Fame. There is something out of your control as an NFL player, right? If Joe Thomas had been on the Patriots the whole time, he would have been viewed way better than he even is, and he's going to go to the Hall of Fame. Like, he didn't control being a member of the Browns. That sucked. Frank was lucky, right? He spent that decade with the Niners. Half of it, they were a joke. And
he made lucky at first.
And he made a couple Pro Bowls. But when Jim got there, 3 straight Pro Bowls, and it was clear he was one of their best players. So I actually think his Hall of Fame argument, when I look at like those 3 Pro Bowls on those 3 elite teams that won 46 regular season games that we still talk about with Jim and all the playoff games, give him a better argument than just the pure stats, which alone would make him in the conversation. Because if I'm Mayoko pounding the table, I go, the 49ers for a 3-year stretch, really 3.5 years, even Jim's 4th year, were one of the best teams in the league. You could argue top 1 or 2 in the league. And he was a top 2 or 3 player on their team, right? And you go, yeah, well, he was never first-team All-Pro. You go, well, Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch, those guys are lock Hall of Famers. Like, he did play in an era where 2 of the better players, right? Because Adrian, is he first ballot? He'll be intriguing because some of the off-the-field stuff. But as a player, I don't think anyone would argue, right?
Right.
And to me, Marshawn, is Marshawn a first ballot Hall of Famer? Because he sure feels like one to me.
Is the class number limit in the NFL? I can never remember which is which.
It feels like they've started adding a little bigger the last couple of years. 5, 6. Maybe not first ballot, but is Marshawn Lynch
going
to the Hall of Fame?
Yeah. I'd have to look. My first reaction is that he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but it's somewhat class dependent. So it wouldn't surprise me. And I think you also have to factor in how hard it was early in Frank's career. He was playing on some teams that throwing the football, like you said, was just a major challenge, let alone protecting the quarterback and run blocking.
I bet there's a decent chance if you go to the 2006 49ers stats, wouldn't shock me if he led the team in pass catches. Would it shock you? 61?
Well, let's see. How many did Ty Streets have?
Good question. 49ers 49ers statistics. So the leading pass catcher that year was receptions. Frank Gore.
I mean, that's outrageous to do that to a player. He had 2 more than Arnaz Battle, John.
Antonio Bryant had 40.
Wow.
Vernon had 20. Wasn't quite Vernon Davis yet.
No, not yet.
Alex Smith, 16 touchdowns, 16 picks.
That was his rookie year? Oh, no, 06 you said. 06.
Would have been a second year probably, right?
Second year.
They weren't good. They were bad. Somehow they went 7-9. Must have had a decent defense.
Well, that was Norv's year, right?
Yeah.
That was the one year with Norv. It was like, all right, they kind of turned a corner.
And then the Chargers hired him to be their head coach.
Yeah, they were 32 out of 32 in the league for points against.
I think Alex Smith had back-to-back years where he had McCarthy and then Norv, and they both became head coaches.
And then it got McCarthy was his rookie year. McCarthy got the
kind of crazy. Alex's career, like he did start with Mike McCarthy and Norv Turner was two coordinators. You know, I think he had a Mike March year in there, didn't he?
March. There was a March year, but I don't think it was it that good of a year. That was year 4.
I don't think it was good at all. But I'm saying Mike March.
State Bulldog.
I feel like Mike March might have been a David Carr, Mike Singletary kind of group.
Minuski, JT O'Sullivan, Alex missed that year. Sean Hill, and then it was Jimmy Ray's time. Nothing.
You're saying Alex missed the Mike March year?
Yeah. Nothing like McCarthy leaving the Niners to go join Rodgers, who had just passed over in the draft, as an all-time awkward first meeting.
You know, hey, Nolan's the boss. Wasn't my call. It's like, I know you had him ranked above me.